And I specifically remember asking myself, let me see if I can just hit a high C, and just kind of testing my range out. And not knowing, of course, and not remembering, I should say, that the pin was loose and I was actually in the middle of tuning. And that's not a good thing. The pin, of course, for those who don't know, has to be tight so that there's no movement of the reed pipe and of the tuning pipe, so that the instrument can play in the way that it's supposed to be played. And with the loose pin, I went to go hit the note. And unfortunately, with a little bit too much pressure applied, trying to hit, of course, a high note that's a little bit more difficult in itself, I try to hit the note and the instrument comes back on me, and the tuning slide goes in and actually comes into my face as I'm playing. It was one of those moments where, of course, you're thinking to yourself, like, 1,000 thoughts are running through your head, and you're going, oh man, I don't know what this is going to mean for me. Like, as soon as it happens, it's like, oh wow, okay, so my lip is bleeding now. And part of my tooth it didn't like go through my lips or anything like that, but it had gone deep into my lips, and I had a really large cut right on the top lip where the mouthpiece sat. I said, what if I put my trumpet mouthpiece to the side and then moved the mouthpiece and my lips to the center, put it to the side and move my mouthpiece to the center so that the air would have the clearest path out of my mouth and from my lungs and whatnot, out of my mouth with the least amount of lip possible. And that was the moment when everything fell right into place. In 2.5 years of frustration and having done everything I could to find out how it should really feel to perform and play the trumpet, finally came to light. And it was at that moment I immediately knew, through how it felt, the comfort that came from that I was like, whoa, I think I just found out how I need to play the trumpet, how I'm going to be able to do this. So patience is key. And I urge anyone who's listening or maybe going through issues not to run out of patience, and just to know that there is no set time. I wish there was. I wish we could all know when it was going to end, when we could solve our issues, and that goes for life as well, but also particularly in this context, trumpet playing. But when you do find that relief, it's a much more prominent feeling, and a much more prominent feeling in that positivity than the negativity that you felt in the moments leading up to trying to improve and finding a regression in your trumpet playing and the frustrations that come with that.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm really excited for you guys to listen into our conversation today. Today's guest is a guy I got connected to through the International Trumpet Guild Conference last year in Minneapolis. He's a great trumpet player in he was in the Columbus area for a little while, and now he's about to pursue a master's degree in music performance there. And so he's another one of our college students who is about to share his experience with us, and I'm really excited for you guys to hear what he has to say. So without further ado, Miles Franklin Smith, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Clark. Thanks for having me on here, and it was such a pleasure meeting you in Minneapolis, Minnesota for that conference. And I was delighted when you reached out about this as well. I've had a good time listening to the podcast so far, and I can't wait to listen to the episodes that I haven't heard yet. And I think this is a really cool and great thing that you have going.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for saying that. I've loved putting these things together. It's been really fulfilling for me, right? As I'm still going through my own injury recovery, but more than that, it's just, I've been loving the comments that I've been getting just about what people are learning, right? That's what it's all about. So let's just get right into it. So at ITG, I can't remember how this came up in conversation. Maybe we were at a jam session or something, but you had mentioned to me that you had also gone through an injury, I believe to your upper lip, like me. And maybe I don't want to misquote you, but can you just share with the audience kind of what, that experience was, like how it happened and however much of the story you want to share?
Sure thing. The injury I sustained happened in the year of 2019. And it was actually, there's a bit of backstory that goes behind it. Uh, I had lived in the Columbus area and in Ohio for 11 and a half years before just recently moving. So we got there, me and my family, in 2012, right before I turned 12 years old. And so it was a fun experience, and it was different, and it was enlightening to be in a city that had, frankly, a little bit more involvement with music and jazz than where I had lived previously, which is Fort Collins, Colorado. And so being in Columbus again, this opened my eyes to so many opportunities and specifically performing opportunities in music, and even opportunities to just hear music and go out and see it and whatnot. One of those opportunities and one of those groups was the Columbus Jazz Orchestra. And I bring them up because they're very prominent in that area and in the region. And it's a really, really fantastic big band led by Maestro Byron Stripling, who ended up being my trumpet teacher. Yeah, which is really heavy. He ended up being my trumpet teacher for about 3 years while at Ohio State University. He kind of was a little bit more silently giving some lessons and whatnot over there, actually, for a little bit of time, considering that he lives in the Columbus area and leads that group. And so it's been inspiring, and he's been one of my heroes growing up, to be able to see him on stage when I would go to CJO performances downtown and see his group and see him play and hear his big sound that he's always been known for, as far back as when he was performing as the lead trumpet player for the Count Basie Orchestra. And to this day, as he's doing all of his work with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra, the solo work that he does with Pops orchestras and other orchestras and big bands across the country, probably across the world.
He's actually coming to Salt Lake, I think, in a couple of months.
That's fantastic. That's awesome.
Area.
It's gonna be good. I'm sure he's gonna blow a lot of people away, probably quite literally. He's fantastic. So
right.
Mm-hmm. And so again, this was a very inspiring group, and it's something that I looked up to so much, so that one day perhaps I could, get good enough at the trumpet and get good enough at jazz that perhaps I could be able to perform in that ensemble myself if I worked hard enough and I put, my ambitions towards it. And so come 2019, I've been playing trumpet at that point for about 7 years. And I had just started my freshman year at Ohio State University. And I'd worked closely with Jazz Arts Group, who's associated with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra, for some years, doing some teaching and some performing. And I finally got this opportunity and got called up to play with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra right at the beginning of my freshman year of college. So this was a really, really big deal. And I remember where I was when I got the call and whatnot, and I was really stoked and excited. It was for a show that would happen on a morning. I believe it was the morning of October 17th. So just 4 days after my 19th birthday. And so the week prior, I have the music and I'm preparing for this show, and I'm really in this zone, and I'm really focused and making sure my chops are right, making sure my reading is right, so that I can not embarrass myself and have a successful time on stage at this performance with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra for my first time performing with them in the section. And so we get to the day before, October 16th, I believe it was, and I'm in my mother's office. Both of my parents teach at Ohio State University, something I'm very fortunate to have these musical role models growing up that kind of molded who I am musically and also just as a person. And so they both have, of course, offices in the music building at Ohio State University. So I would always be in my mom's office practicing, because there was air conditioning in there, and a little bigger and a little more comfortable maybe than the practice rooms that we had at OSU. So it was a convenient opportunity to be able to practice in there. And as I'm practicing in there, I think that day I'd started warming up and I wanted to work on something on my flugelhorn, because I knew I needed to use my flugelhorn for part of the pieces that we performing with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra that following morning. So it's the day before, and of course, everyone who plays trumpet is familiar with the flugelhorn and how it works. But for anybody who might not be as familiar, of course, you have a different method of tuning associated with the instrument than with the trumpet. And it's a little bit more involved, as you have this lead pipe where the mouthpiece goes into, which is accessible and movable as to influence the tuning. And then, of course, you have the tuning pin as well that feeds right into that lead pipe. And so I pick up my trumpet one day, my flugelhorn, and I'm warming up a little bit. And then I think I got a text on my phone or something. So I look down at my phone and I'm checking that or whatever, just to see whatever was going on. Or maybe I just was checking my email, who knows. And so I was tuning, and I was in the middle of tuning the flugelhorn when that text came through. So the pin was actually loose, and I was stopped in the middle of what I was doing to go check my phone. So the pin is loose. Finish whatever I was doing on my phone, get back to my trumpet, and forgot that the pin was loose and not tight. And because of that, I went and I specifically remember asking myself, let me see if I can just hit a high C, and just kind of testing my range out. Not knowing, of course, and not remembering, I should say, that the pin was loose and I was actually in the middle of tuning. And that's not a good thing. The pin, of course, for those who don't know, has to be tight so that there's no movement of the lead pipe and of the tuning pipe so that the instrument can play in the way that it's supposed to be played. And with the loose pin, I went to go hit the note. And unfortunately, with a little bit too much pressure applied, trying to hit, of course, a high note that's a little bit more difficult in itself, I try to hit the note and the instrument comes back on me, and the tuning slide goes in and actually comes into my face as I'm playing, which might look perhaps not so dramatic here on the screen or for anybody who's listening, but it comes back at you with a lot of force. And at that time, I was playing with even more pressure on my lips as well, which didn't help, this circumstance by any means. So as I'm trying to go for the note, it violently comes back and just slams into my lips. And that was quite a scary moment. It's definitely a nightmare moment for any brass instrumentalist and any trumpet player specifically. And it was one of those moments where, of course, you're thinking to yourself, like, 1,000 thoughts are running through your head and you're going, oh man, I don't know what this is going to mean for me. Like, as soon as it happens, it's like, oh, wow. Okay, so my lip is bleeding now, and part of my tooth it didn't like go through my lips or anything like that, but it had gone deep into my lips, and I had a really large cut right on the top lip where the mouthpiece sat. There was a lot of other issues at the time I was dealing with as well, not necessarily influencing my playing, but more so things that would hurt me in the long run that I became to be aware of in college. I used to play, as they call, on the red as well. And that had a lot to do with the injury. So when I went to go hit that note, all of this part of the skin of my lip was exposed. And I, as you can tell and the audience can tell, I have quite wide and thick lips. And so that made for a large target, if you will, for this injury. And so the mouthpiece came right back on here and hit right where the teeth is right here. It actually came and again, my teeth punctured the inside of my lips and kind of this top part too, as I went to go play. So there was, it wasn't too, gory or anything like that, but there was a fair amount of blood and certainly a lot of pain. And again, it was a scary moment and a reflective moment to ask myself, wow, all right, what is this going to mean? How am I going to move forward? Can I play this show tomorrow? Again, it's important not to forget that one of my biggest, performances with a group that I've been looking up to for like my whole career at this point was going to happen the next morning. And so the timing was certainly just extremely poor with this injury. So a lot of thoughts were going through my head. Can I play tomorrow? Is it smart to play tomorrow? Even if I can play tomorrow, is it healthy to play tomorrow? Or am I going to worsen things? And from then on, that afternoon, my career changed and my career path changed and my playing trajectory significantly shifted. It was a moment that I'm not glad it happened, but it brought so much awareness after that to how I'm playing the trumpet, and it's forced me to really think differently and critically about how serious my embouchure and my technique is. And now I put my technique first, just to make sure that I'm approaching, my future, honestly, in the smartest way possible, because trumpet, as is a phrase I've heard from many, many other trumpet players, is a very unforgiving instrument. That is something that's always been true, and it will always be true. You know that, and everybody who's ever played the instrument knows that. It's hard to just take time off from the instrument. It's hard to stay consistent on the instrument, and playing every day, as everyone knows, is such an important thing and aspect of the instrument. And so when one thing goes wrong, many things go wrong. When one injury on just one small part of your lips gets impacted, it's actually something that is almost like a tree branch that finds its way to other issues and kind of sprouts out, and there's a bigger picture all of a sudden to an injury, all because I didn't tighten the tuning slide on my flugelhorn tuning lead pipe, which was really unfortunate. So it was a scary time. It led to me having issues with stability and just playing the trumpet after that for about 2 years, 2.5 years. It took about 2.5 years, I think, for me to become truly comfortable performing and find that place of comfort. It was hard. It was very hard. And after that, I had issues with my endurance. I had issues with my range. I had issues with comfort. I had issues finding comfortable mouthpieces. I had issues with how my lips reacted to myself playing, because the injury changed something in my lips, and suddenly I'd start having a ring that would like kind of pop up right here that had never really been there before. So kind of the structure of my lips I don't know how, but was different than before the injury and whatnot. And this impacted so many parts of the musicality, so many parts of business as well, in terms of gigging and performing, which obviously is something I had to step away from for a little bit so I could get better. It was really difficult.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot in there that I'd love to unpack with you. Thanks for sharing that story. I didn't realize, maybe I just forgot from our conversation back in May, that it was from a flugelhorn. One of my first guests, I don't know if you know him, Brad Good. He teaches at the, in Colorado, in
Right.
Boulder. And when he was a teenager, same thing happened with the flugelhorn lead pipe. That thing is a treacherous thing to get wrong, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So that happened your first semester of college, correct?
That's right. Correct.
And so not only did you have like these gigs, right, getting onto the scene in Columbus, but you also had your education that was affected by that. And so kind of, if you want to just share with the audience, and before I forget, Miles, for anybody who's listening on just the audio, Miles did a lot with demonstrating with the flugelhorn and the mouthpiece that I think is really valuable for y'all to catch on the video. So at some point, hop over to YouTube and catch the video version of this episode. But anyway, so what was your comeback like? That 2.5 years of coming back and getting back to where you felt like you were solid on the horn? Because I feel like there's kind of two aspects to that. Or three actually in my mind. There's like the physical, obviously, like your body has to heal, right? And then there's the mental aspect of it, because you're having this major form of expression, right, taken away from you, and then the musical or pedagogical side. So that's like the recovering musically, changing your playing, changing your equipment, how it's affected you musically in that time when you weren't able to use your primary source of musical expression. So what was that process like for you, those 2.5 years?
It was certainly a long 2.5 years. There were so many moments of trial and error that took place throughout the entire time that relates to a lot of trial and error with a bunch of mouthpieces that I was trying to see if that might have been part of the issue with my recovery and with comfort and getting back into a comfortable method of playing. Trial and error just with some of the sheets I was given, some of the routines that I was implementing into my schedule with some of the workouts that I had, long tones and whatnot, and other exercises for trumpet. So it was certainly a lot of doubt, and there's no question about that. I tried my best to remain optimistic. And I think for most of the time I really was, as I look back. But there was also a lot of moments where I really was beginning to reconsider, my future with trumpet and how much I really wanted a future with trumpet. Because it's the kind of thing when you go through it once and you understand how impactful it is, how painful it is. And you certainly will tell yourself in those moments, well, I certainly hope I never have to go through this again.
Yep.
And of course, there's a lot of people out there. I think Brad Good was one of those. Was it 3 times that he had 3 significant injuries or so, I think?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's always that feeling. Even now to this day, I always think to myself, like, man, I certainly make sure that I am extra cautious on how tight my lead pipe tuning slide is on my flugelhorn. No question about that. In other moments too, you just think differently. It causes you to be a little bit more aware in every single moment. If I'm playing in my room, I make sure, if I'm practicing or whatever, that I have enough space around me so that I don't just like accidentally ding the bell of my instrument on a dresser on the wall and then it hit my lips, which has happened a couple times. It's been nothing significant, but it's enough to make me go, whoa, oh my goodness, I need to not do that, because that could have been a lot more harmful and that could have been a lot more significant to the future of my career, which I now know can be impacted so much by something so little and minuscule, which I think is something that's so fascinating about trumpet. And it's almost something to appreciate, that we have our large bodies as human beings, but it's such a small area that takes up such a small percentage of your entire body that has such a large impact on your entire sound on an instrument like a trumpet, or even other instruments and other brass instruments. It's fascinating. There's no question about it.
One of my previous guests, he's a trombone player, Austin Pantsner, and he's actually developed a coaching business because of this injury that he went through. And something he says that I just really agree with, and I tell everyone that look, gives me a funny look when I say I hurt my lip playing trumpet. I just say, look, we're athletes of small muscles, and athletes have to rest just as much as we do. In fact, probably more. But at the same, I mean, it's all proportional, but we work fine motor skills with small muscles that are actually more delicate than the muscles that most athletes use. And so that's even more of something to keep in mind. So
definitely.
But anyway, please continue.
Sure. On the first aspect that you brought up, which is performing and gigging and whatnot, that was obviously the first thing that was impacted. That was the first thing that was impacted on the day of the injury, of course. And the next day I had to ask myself if I could even go to the theater and do the performance with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra like I had planned on and intended and hoped. And from then on, my lips were not the same. My endurance had shrunk significantly. And I wasn't in a shape to be able to take gigs. Or someone would ask me perhaps to perform a gig, and I had to really take a lot of time to think to myself. They give me the itinerary and the details, and the gig is from this time to this time. And I had to ask myself for quite a bit of minutes, do I have the endurance today to be able to get to this gig? And of course, as a trumpet player, our ultimate goal is to work towards being so proficient in our instruments that we don't have to ask that kind of question. We just know we can take care of business. But this is one of those circumstances where every single time I got asked for a gig, or many of the circumstances, I'd have to ask myself if I was prepared, if my lips could get through it, if I'd be hurting myself more by taking the gig than not taking it at all. Sure, it might be a little bit of money in my pocket, but as it relates to my future, am I going to actually hurt maybe how much money I'm going to make down the line by worsening my lip condition and not being able to perform, or whatever the case may be? But interestingly, workload with gigs didn't really slow down, and that caused a lot of contemplation and a lot of time, evaluation on my part of how I was going to proceed with the healing of my lips, because I was starting to really make a name for myself at that point in the community and in the city of Columbus. And it was at that moment in my freshman year, just a little bit before that concert, a couple months before, where I started regularly having a lot more performances and gigs throughout the whole city and whatnot. So it was also a controversial time for myself, because again, I had to ask myself, well, is this the right time to slow down? Because I'm kind of on a fast track at the moment, and I'm in a place where my career is just only growing, and I don't want that to stop. I want to be the best I could be. I want to be as reliable and well known as I can be. So I might as well keep performing. And with that, obviously, I'll say I didn't really slow down. I just continued to perform and tried to power through it. And then there were moments with the following weeks and months that felt better than others. There was times where I remember speaking with my professor at the time, Byron Stripling, and talking with him, and he would always tell me something that you reminded me of a moment ago, Clark, which is his phrase that he certainly seems to live by is rest as much as you play. He would always constantly kind of beat that into us students' brains. But I think it was a really important point to bring up, and something that I still that resonates with me still, and something I still think about to this day. Even though my lips are in great condition and my playing is in great condition, I still want to ask myself, am I playing too much? Do I need to rest? Sometimes resting can be more important than the daily playing that we tell ourselves that we need to do as trumpet players, at least in this stage of my playing and whatnot. So the work didn't slow down, and I continued to play. And some days were terrible, some days were fine. Sometimes my range was really great. Sometimes my range had a drop off, and I was still just trying to get comfortable with it. But at the time, I didn't really realize, in the couple months afterwards, how impacted my lips truly were. And so things really started slowing down. The injury happened in October, so my playing was beginning to suffer significantly in January and February and early March of the next year, which is 2020. And so for anybody who hasn't been living under a rock in the past 4 years, I'm sure you know where this is going. And that is that things, whether I liked it or not, in terms of playing and gigging and performances and school, were to come to such a halt in the beginning of 2020. And come March, Ohio State had a spring break that started as 1 week and extended into 2 weeks and then extended into a month and then became the longest spring break known to man. That essentially extended up until the start of the next school year.
That sounds like a 60 Minutes documentary about
COVID. It does. It was a crazy, I remember it was a crazy. I mean, not that was that long ago, but it was so significant. It was something that had never happened before. Students had never experienced something like that. So I was forced, and everyone else was forced to not perform. There was no gigs happening, and everyone was to stay inside because of mandates and whatnot due to COVID-19 and the outbreak of the coronavirus. And it was, as I'll always say, that it was an unfortunate circumstance for the whole world in terms of people, of course, losing opportunities in work and whatnot, but also, more importantly, the health of folks, especially the health of people who were at high risk and folks who, unfortunately, had passed away because of the virus and the sicknesses and whatnot. So all that to say, it was almost, for me and my playing, perhaps it was the best case scenario to forcefully come to a stop and not perform so that I could really take the time to focus on how I'm going to improve my lips and improve my health of my lips and my playing and these things that have been on my mind for so long. So now we're into 2020, we're in the springtime, summertime, and there's no performances. So I'm just at home and I'm trying everything I can. I'm speaking with Professor Stripling, and I'm also being connected with some folks. Professor Stripling had connected me with Brad Good, of all people, over Zoom, so that because he knew about Brad Good's injury, and we tried to discuss over Zoom some things and some methods that we could do to improve my lips. Stripling also connected me with Charlie Porter as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and Charlie Porter, of course, for those who don't know, fantastic, virtuosic trumpet player with such amazing classical and jazz skills. Somebody who, I don't know where he got his start. I know he lived in Portland, Oregon for some time and gigged out there. And I think he lives in New York City now. And he's an amazing musician, but he also is really into the sciences and the scientific nature of our lips, our lip structure, buzzing, and all of the details, the fine details that go into performing and playing trumpet. I met on Zoom with him, and he gave me some really, really good pointers on his idea of playing on the red versus playing not on the red. He has a video that has, I think, a few 100,000 views on YouTube.
I've seen that one, yeah.
Yeah, discussing this and the idea of playing on the red and the importance of it. And as I mentioned earlier, my playing from when I first started playing trumpet in 2012 up until 2020 had been like this. And for those who can't see, the mouthpiece is just on the red part or the lip part of my lips. It was just all lip. So this is kind of my old embouchure. And what that came with was no support, was no anchor to have from any other part of my face and the muscles in the face. I was trying to do too much work, and I was over-exuding energy from my lips to try and get notes out, and it just wasn't healthy at all by any means. The lip injury has certainly further put this bad technique at risk and whatnot. So, meeting with Charlie Porter online, he told me about the idea of perhaps curling my lips in and forcing my lips to almost like shrink in a way.
Right.
Which is a hard thing for me to do, of course, because again, my lips are much more thicker, I think, than your average trumpet player. So I had to do a lot of tucking. And so I'm forcing a lot of my outer lip to now be inside as I play and facing my teeth and facing the inside of my mouth. And what this created was an anchor in a way for my lips to not be able to escape and do this and be outside and instead have restraints, which for the sake of buzzing and the sake of air is a much more ideal way to play the trumpet because not as much air is escaping, not as much lip is escaping. You have the support to be able to have the strength for your lips to stay in one place and not move around and not be, of course, not be slippery around the mouthpiece either. You just, as a trumpet player, of course, you want to be as stable as possible, and you want to be as you know, have the least amount of movement as possible, not just everywhere in your body, but also just on your lips and stuff. And I always tell my students, you know, you want to look the same, as similar as possible when you're playing a high G as you are when you're playing a low G. It's not going to be exactly the same, but our facial structure shouldn't change a whole lot as we are performing, because that's a sign of good technique, at least from the teachers that I've worked with and the circumstances that I've found myself in. So the work was affected, and then I didn't have as much work. So this gave me the time, of course, to be able to sit down and practice and be in my own room, be in my own space and evaluate a way of trying to improve. But this wasn't necessarily happening, that being improvement. I wasn't necessarily getting better. My range was actually seemingly getting worse. Every single day, I sat down and I would try to practice for as long as possible, whether it was, typically between 1 and 2 hours, 1 and 2.5 hours between that time range. And there was nothing else to do, of course, because everything was shut down and locked down. So it was a good time for me to be able to put this much time into practicing. And I was doing long tone exercises, and I was doing strength exercises for the lips and stuff like that, even things that didn't revolve around specifically playing the trumpet. I tried putting ice on my lips, as well as had been recommended to me from other trumpet players in Columbus to be able to do that. I tried resting and taking a week or two off and not playing and seeing if that would help fix the issues in the ring that I began to form in my lips and whatnot. So tried all these methods, and I seemed to be getting worse. I seemed to be regressing rather than progressing. And it was something that was so frustrating and also so demoralizing in a way, because this thing that you work so hard towards for so many years and something that you have so much passion in begins to go downhill and kind of almost seem like it's opposing you and doing the exact opposite of what it is you're trying to accomplish. And I noticed such a significant regression in my playing. There became a point where I couldn't play for more than about 15 minutes without my lips giving up and being completely tired. And that's the point when I knew something was certainly wrong. After that, now we're in the later part of 2020, I'd go on a large mouthpiece hunt, as many trumpet players do, which is a thing that I think I would honestly recommend to trumpet players, especially people who are kind of intermediate, just to find something and to seek out and to experiment with what might be comfortable, because there's trumpet playing and trumpet science and trumpet makeup and the idea of production of trumpets has come such a long way. That there are so many options that I think it's a healthy thing for people to be able to try and go out and find something that fits,
at least be in the know about it, right?
Definitely. There's so much to know. And we all, of course, something that I think we don't think about enough as trumpet players and musicians is that we all have different facial structures. Everybody does. There are people who have some that are more similar to others, but a 7C, a 5C even is not going to work too well for me because I literally cannot fit my lips into mouthpieces that small. But for somebody else who might have very little lip, that might be something that is the perfect mouthpiece for them. I know people who play mouthpieces that are even smaller than that. And I ask myself, how can you do that? But then I have to remind myself, well, because they're different than I am, and I'm different than they are, excuse me. And for me, I might have to play something that's a little bit larger just for the sake of the biology of my makeup. And I think that's something that should be a little bit more perhaps prioritized in the introduction of many young students into trumpet playing and stuff like that. If I don't know if you might agree with me on that, but
100%. Actually, my first guest, the great Bobby Shu, he and I were talking about this in that interview, and he kind of elaborated on that a little bit and showed some of the things that he's working on with some other mouthpiece companies to give a more not a boiled down version of mouthpieces for a beginning student, but something that's just a little bit more conducive to beginning playing, and then for different, the different physiological structures that students may have. So someone with thicker lips, they've got a mouthpiece that he's designing for that. And honestly, like that was probably one of the biggest realizations that I came to when I first got injured was, hey, we're all different, big surprise, right? And what may work for me from an equipment standpoint, from a pedagogical standpoint, from, the words that we use when we're teaching even, it just may not work for other people, and so that's just, it's kind of, the onus is on us as players and as teachers and, whoever is just in this business to be in the know about, as Bobby talks about, like the science behind the breath, the science behind, the physiology and the anatomy of our face and the rest of our body and equipment. It's kind of a holistic thing. There's a lot to know, but I think the payoff is definitely worth it if it means that less trumpet players get hurt because of it, So I'm 100% on board with what you just said there. It's just, you can't, you have to have the right tool for the job. And you also that's like a cliche in our world, I think, is you have to have the right tool for the job. But I think you also have to have the right tool for the face,
Yeah. And in this case, this is the tool right here, so.
Right.
Yeah. The mouthpiece hunt I went on must have been around 20 mouthpieces that I think, maybe 25 or so, that I ended up either purchasing or borrowing from somewhere, or purchasing from friends, or them lending it to me, or purchasing online within about a 2-year time frame, beginning, I believe, in mid to late 2020. And it was an eye-opening experience. Some people say you don't want to do that, just find something that's comfortable, stick with it. But how can I know what's truly comfortable if I don't go out and experiment and see? And unfortunately, in Columbus, Ohio, there's not a whole lot of brass shops. In fact, there really isn't any brass shops except for one. So the idea of wanting to try certain different brands is unrealistic, because you just can't find out unless you travel to their workshops, like Harrelson in Denver or Monat in Oregon, or you purchase them for yourself, because that's the only way for you to actually feel what it feels like on your face, And descriptions online, of course, can only do so much. They're helpful, and they were helpful for me to be able to compare mouthpieces. But you never really know until you try it. And so I was doing a whole lot of that, a whole lot of trying, a whole lot of seeing what I liked. I went and searched up perhaps mouthpieces for trumpet players with larger lips that had thicker rims, which in ways felt more comfortable, but in other ways didn't seem to be curing this issue that I've been facing, which was just overall regression of the trumpet. I tried trying the biggest mouthpiece I could find. I ended up, my friend gave me a Bach 1CW, which is not just a 1C, but the W, of course, stands for wide. So it's even larger. I mean, it's pretty much as large as it gets. And I tried playing on that for a little bit, because I figured, well, the issue must be mouthpiece size, because I was having some bottoming out issues with some mouthpieces that were smaller because they didn't seem to fit my lips. And I always thought to myself, well, my lips are larger, I should use a bigger mouthpiece, because if your feet are larger and you go to the shoe store, you're not going to go and find those shoes that are smaller. You're going to buy a larger pair of shoes. If you have a shirt and you're a medium, you're going to wear a medium or a large. You're probably not going to wear a small because it's not going to fit you too well. It's going to be too tight. And I figured that tightness was also an issue with the mouthpiece and with trumpet playing and whatnot. So I bought so many larger mouthpieces and mouthpieces with different kinds of rims to kind of fit the mold of my face. But that also wasn't solving the issue, which was super strange to me. And it was at that point when I began to kind of lose hope, if you will, in my future and in the future of my career. And I thought to myself, okay, I've tried the long tones. I've tried all the exercises. I've tried everything Professor Stripling has told me. I've spoken to Brad Good, and I've spoken to Charlie Porter and other folks. I've spoken to other trumpet players that I knew in Columbus or other friends of mine. I've tried mouthpieces that have thicker rims. I've tried different trumpets. I've tried mouthpieces that are deeper or more shallow, because maybe the shallower mouthpieces could help because I can get the high notes out a little bit with a little bit more ease, perhaps. I tried mouthpieces with larger throats and smaller throats, and I tried everything I could. But in terms of hardware, in terms of the pedagogical side of things and my approach, nothing seemed to be working. I went eventually, probably in early 2021, maybe late 2020, I went and I think this is sometime more so in mid 2021 or so. I went to the doctor and even brought up the idea of a lip reduction. And I just said, well, would this be a smart thing? It wasn't a decision I just made to say, I'm getting my lips smaller and reduced, let's do it. But it was an idea that I brought forth to my doctor. And I said, well, what do you think of this? Is it worth it? Is this going to hurt in the long run? Or is this something that if I want to be a trumpet player, might be more realistic? And I went online and I searched up on the internet, and I honestly couldn't find a trumpet player who had lips this thick or even thicker than mine, in all honesty, which is nothing I'm ashamed of, don't get me wrong. But again, it was very daunting and certainly wasn't motivating towards this instrument that I had picked to be my career instrument by any means. And I started to get into the mindset of, well, this instrument was not created for me. Not that the person who created the trumpet thought to themselves that, oh, we're going to make this they're going to make this instrument in a mouthpiece only to fit people with thin lips. But it certainly wasn't helping, and I wasn't aided in any means playing the trumpet. And I just felt like I was at such a disadvantage, and it was, again, kind of demoralizing, and it was scary. And nothing was working. There came a point, I think in 2021, June or July or so, where I just told myself, perhaps I just need to take a mental moment to step away from the trumpet. And also maybe part of the issue is the fact that I haven't really given myself enough time for my lips to heal after the injury. Because if you recall, after the injury happened in October of 2019, I went straight back into gigging and performing and playing school concerts. There was times I'd have 3 performances a day, or I'd have many, many performances in a week, and I was working really hard, and I enjoyed it. And I wouldn't necessarily take it back if I could go back and do it again. But then I thought to myself, well, maybe I was pushing too hard. Maybe I was doing a little bit too much and not giving my lips enough time to recover. And perhaps I permanently have damaged my lips. So in this time of 2021, June or July or so, I put down the trumpet for a month and a half, and I didn't play it. And I wanted to just I didn't give myself a time frame. I just put the trumpet in my case and just stopped playing and said, let's just see how long I can go. And let's make sure it's a long enough time, month plus, to be comfortable that it's an appropriate time frame for any healing to have taken place. You know, break your wrists, which happened to me, playing basketball in middle school, it's going to take about 6, maybe 8 weeks to heal. Other injuries, breaks, things like that, perhaps a month of time frame can be comparable to what I needed to do in order to heal my lips and get better and improve again and progress in my trumpet playing. So I take that time off. A month and a half goes by, and I knew I missed it because I ended up having, I know when I truly miss something when I start to have dreams about them. And so right. I have many, in the time from 2012 when I started playing trumpet till now, I haven't had many trumpet playing dreams at all, but the majority of them, which had to have been, perhaps 3 to 5 or so, very vivid dreams took place in that month and a half, where I was just missing it and thinking to myself, oh man, my brain knew something was up and knew something in my life had come to a halt and hadn't been continuing. And that was trumpet playing. And it was a good sign, I think, that, that really truly tested my passion towards it. And I knew I missed it and I wanted to get back to it. So a month and a half goes by. And finally, one day I take my trumpet out of my case, and I think school is going to be starting again soon. So I want to get back into it and go into my, I think, junior year at this time of college. And I start playing again, and was surprised that I didn't feel like I had lost as much of my range and tone as I suspected, because in that point I had been playing for 9 years, and in that 9 years I had never ever taken more than about a week off just to go to a family vacation or something like that. So as trumpet players who are listening know, a month and a half is an incredibly long time. It might not be 10 months like Bobby Shue perhaps, or even years that other folks had experienced in the music community over the years, but a month and a half is still an incredibly long time. And again, I figured it was enough time for me to be able to recover. I get back to it, start playing. And after about a week or so, I continue to notice that the improvement that I seek hasn't found me. And it was at that point where I came to a day I was trying to practice. And I was trying to stay motivated, and I'd begun to lose a little bit of my motivation and my desire to play trumpet as a whole. And I started to get really negative towards my future thoughts of this instrument. And it must have been September or so, 2021. And I came to a point where I had a day, I tried practicing, and I got about 15 minutes in and I couldn't continue to play on. And I set the trumpet down in frustration and just sat on my bed and had to ask myself, do I want to stop playing like today? Do I want to look into a new instrument, maybe even a new career path? Because this is clearly not working. And at that point, it had been 2 years that I had been attempting to improve and thinking I found breakthroughs, and then regressing very significantly and finding no progress and no forward motion with my playing, which certainly was not going to create any forward motion with my career. And I knew I had so much, we always have growing to do as players, but I knew I had so much more I wanted to obtain in my trumpet playing and in my career at this point. And I had a really promising career at this point through some of what I'd been documented in Columbus, Ohio, and some of the performances that I had done, and the name I started making for myself and the connections I made and whatnot. So it was really hard to think about something that people constantly compliment me on and think that perhaps I was like chosen to do, not really chosen, but destined, if you will, people might say, or something that had fit me so well, something I had been doing so well in, that I had such a career in. That's really what I mean by that idea of destined. For anybody listening, I'm putting these in air quotes. I don't really believe I'd been destined or chosen to play the trumpet or anything like that. But it was something that obviously I had I don't even know how to put it. Just
like a proclivity for, or an aptitude for.
Certainly an aptitude for, and something that I had just naturally had been doing really well. So I sat down one day and just thought for like quite a while. And I remember there was one person in my life who was my girlfriend at the time. We're not together anymore, but I talked with her about it, and we had a conversation, and I had told her, well, I'm thinking about quitting, and I don't know if I really want to continue to do this. And she was then and is still now a trumpet player. So she kind of understood the frustrations, and she understood the idea of how difficult this was and how difficult playing the trumpet in general is. But she pretty much is single-handedly the reason why I did not quit playing the trumpet. And she provided me with enough motivation and enough motivation to continue on and not give up and she told me, I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of she knew she had been there to see my career path for a few years and where I was headed with my playing, my career, um, and my stature in Columbus and whatnot. And, she just told me, keep on trying. Could be a lot worse. There are worse things that could come out of this, but you're too deep and too far in to give up now. I would hope you would continue. Everyone wants to see you continue. And so again, she provided me with that motivation. And from then on, listening to her words and her advice, I thought to myself, okay, I'll give this one more shot, see what we can do. And it was later that year where, I think it was really then when I had started the idea of curling my lips in more. And because I think it was actually at that point, and perhaps I misspoke earlier about the time frame, but I think it was at that point when I met with Charlie Porter online. I think that's when he kind of explained to me the idea of the playing in the red and whatnot, and playing up top and having the anchor of this, the outer part of your lips and your face and whatnot, playing the trumpet. So I had started to adjust and move into that way of trying to play. And it was kind of a 3-step process of curling your lips, making sure your lips are touching and curling inside, putting your mouthpiece up, and then slowly opening kind of a gap to make sure there's enough air to go through. And I'd been attempting that process sometime, I think around November or December 2021. And at first it was slow, wasn't finding a whole lot of progress. I felt locked in. I felt like my lips couldn't go anywhere. I felt like I was in a place that felt a little bit too constrained with my mouthpiece and my lips and my trumpet playing, and it was really uncomfortable. But I wanted to give it time, and Charlie Porter told me over Zoom, he said, just give it some time. Allow yourself maybe a year to be able to get back to where you were, because that's typically the kind of a time frame of how long this might take. Maybe it'll take a little longer, but you got to be patient. And the patience part was so important. Ever since I was young, quite young, I lived then, and I still to this day live by a motto of the fact that patience is key. I believe that kind of in everything in life, one should be patient, whether it's little things like waiting at the airport to get on your airplane and to go to your destination, or whether you're in a place where your career is questioned and you want to move forward, but it's hard, and you're in a place perhaps where you discovered an injury or something like that. But I think that patience is key, because there is such a multitude of scenarios, solutions, and fixes to these issues. And it's impossible for them to all become known to you in such a small moment. Some things might not come. It might take 5 years for something to suddenly come to you. Or maybe it was something you were told about your career and about something that you wanted to achieve, and somebody who was a mentor told you 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And now through your experiences and through your playing in your career, then it becomes more apparent. It becomes something that comes to light through patience. You'll be able to find those things, I think. And through patience, I was able to eventually start finding some improvement finally in my playing through the method of curling my lips and having a little bit of an anchor to be able to play. And this was a tough thing for a while, because I had done, my lips were continuing to get damaged, even though I was starting to kind of finally find some progress. And I had to curl my lips, and through curling my lips, there is a space above the red of my lips and above that portion, kind of where, the mustache would be on someone's face or something, that had not before experienced the feeling of a mouthpiece on it. Right. So it's very delicate skin. And it was so delicate and not before utilized that it was fragile. And through trying to play in this new method, I was constantly putting a lot of pressure, not forceful pressure, but just pressure in general that had not been felt there before. And material, this metal that is just going up, rubbing up against part of my skin that had never felt that before. And it was starting to damage that part. So I actually cut my lip up here many different times through just like a continual rubbing of the mouthpiece on it, which was frustrating. It wasn't like the cut that had happened that had sparked the injury. It was more of just like a gradual like rubbing off of the skin that exposed a beneath layer of the skin, and then sometimes led to a little bit of blood or just skin loss. or just a stinging sensation of that kind of in-between skin. So this would proceed to happen many times, and now we're in late 2021, November, December, January. I mean, I cut my lips a lot, 5 or so times perhaps throughout the course of many weeks trying to find this new embouchure. But eventually, like, I'm starting to get more used to it. My skin is kind of starting to harden a little bit, and I'm starting to be able to really create that anger in a place that's that my face is used to for my mouthpiece to sit. And there's irony in when it was that I kind of figured it out, and when things really kind of locked into place. When my injury first happened, it was before my biggest performance at that point in my career. It was the day before. It was less than 24 hours before my first performance with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra as a performer in that section. And when things locked in, was in that same room in my mom's office, practicing at Ohio State, in my mother's office, the day before I had a performance, my biggest performance still to this day, and especially then, performing with Darius Rucker, country star extraordinaire, and multi-time Grammy Award winner and singer of The Blowfish and whatnot. And I'd been asked to perform with him a few weeks prior to this mid-February date that we had at the Palace Theater downtown in Columbus, Ohio, to perform with him, which was such a special experience. And the day before that performance, I'm in my mother's room, office, practicing. And in the weeks preceding that, I've been trying to follow this advice from Charlie Porter. I've been doing a little bit of moving around of the mouthpiece on my lips. I tried so many things at this point, in the prior years, playing on the red, playing with my lips tucked in, playing with more lip down here, more red of the lip on my bottom lip than the top lip, playing with more red on the top lip than the lower lip, playing to the sides, playing up more. So I'd have even more of an anchor on the top part of my lip, which I felt was important, playing with even more anchor down here or in both spaces, really tightening my lips, all kinds of different things. I was even trying different methods in my trumpet playing as to where, my grip, how I was holding the trumpet. I started holding it like this when I was younger, like most folks do, I think. I started trying different grips, like to have less pressure coming back at me as I'm playing, perhaps putting a finger up here or two fingers above the actual bell piping, trying to put one finger down here to kind of reduce pressure as well and create more balance in my structure and how I'm holding it. Maybe two fingers, so I have perfect balance of two fingers up here, two fingers down here, so that there's not one area up with these two fingers or down with these two fingers that's getting more pressure. So I'm trying all these different methods and whatnot. But the method that ended up being the thing where being the moment where my playing clicked into place was trying to move the mouthpiece side to side. And I thought to myself one day, okay, let me try this method. I've tried all these hundreds of methods at this point. Let me try moving my mouthpiece to the side and then playing from there. Because I told myself, well, I have larger lips, and that is obviously a thing that has gotten in my way. But what if I manipulated my lips to be smaller, like trumpet players who have been more successful, who have been successful and well known in the scope of history in trumpet playing? What if I made my lips smaller like them? Maybe then I'll find more success. Maybe not through surgery and reducing the lip size, but by just manipulating my lips to be smaller. Curling them in is one of those things that, of course, Charlie Porter taught me. What you're doing when you're curling your lips in is almost making your outer lip smaller. So I'm already kind of doing that. I said, how can I make my lips even smaller? I'll curl it in, and then I'll go to where the thinnest part of my lip is when I curl in, which is the side, either one of the sides of my mouth. And because the most, thickest part, as you can see when I curl, is the middle part of my lips. There's the most chunk of the lip right there. So I think the most blocking of air coming through, which is such an important component to trumpet playing, I think the most blockage of air was going to come in that center part. So I said, okay, what if I just move to this side? I started trying playing there. I started finding a little bit of success. I started finding a little bit more resonance with the notes that was coming out, and the buzz started to feel a bit more like it should, like I knew it should, and a bit more locked in. And then the evening before the Darius Rucker performance that I had in Columbus, I said, what if I put my trumpet mouthpiece to the side and then moved the mouthpiece and my lips to the center, put it to the side and move my mouthpiece to the center so that the air would have the clearest path out of my mouth and from my lungs and whatnot, out of my mouth with the least amount of lip possible. And that was the moment when everything fell right into place. In 2.5 years of frustration and having done everything I could to find out how it should really feel to perform and play the trumpet, finally came to light. And it was at that moment I immediately knew through how it felt, the comfort that came from that I was like, whoa, I think I just found out how I need to play the trumpet, how I'm going to be able to do this. And suddenly notes started coming out so much more clear. My slurring particularly also had just like improved so much. So I didn't have as much breakage between octaves and even higher. I was starting to have more connectivity and it started to feel really, really good. My tone was really solid. And the icing on the cake is that my endurance was significant. I was able to finally play for longer at that point than maybe 30 minutes or an hour. I was starting to be able to play. I felt like I could play as long as I wanted to because I had enough strength. And this upper part up here where the mouthpiece is finally lying was now rough enough and tough enough to be able to withstand. I felt like I had enough anchor in my lips. And finally, the day before this huge concert, which is a big deal, which I didn't want to mess up in front of, thousands of people, I finally figured it out and things finally locked into place. And I felt really comfortable. I went into the performance the next day. I did an okay job. I still missed a couple notes. I was still getting used to things. I was still getting used to this new method of putting it to the side and putting the mouthpiece to the center when I bring it to the side. It's shifting my lips. But wow, at that point, I never regressed after that. And that was the key to it all, and the key to the patience, if you will, was that I never regressed after that point. I only started improving. I only started noticing improvement. I was finally able to be able to have consistent and really clear and easy, not easy, but more ease in my high notes and in my endurance. And finally, after 2.5 years, at that point, there was still some adjusting after that I would have to do, and things would fall out of place just a little bit. So for a while, it was still never like perfectly comfortable, but it was more comfortable than it had ever been in my entire life. I basically had figured it out. And I think it was finally what year is it? Oh my gosh, time is flying. It's 2024 now. So I think it was about probably a year ago, maybe a little more than that, when I finally found a comfortable place. And I haven't really looked back since. And I haven't had to think so hard about my trumpet playing. It's finally reached a point of almost maximum comfort through so much trial and error and so much patience after all that time. So I can finally say that I'm much more comfortable, and I think it's good. It's perhaps good to have gone through it when I did, because now I know, what this patience amounts to, and what that payoff feels like that you kind of mentioned yourself earlier, because the payoff has been significant, and now I'm performing and teaching more than ever, and my career has just taken off since in the Ohio area and whatnot. And now I'm pursuing new things with graduate school beginning here soon at Northern Illinois University, making new connections out here. So patience is key. And I urge anyone, who's listening or maybe going through issues not to run out of the patience, and just to know that there is no set time. I wish there was. I wish we could all know when it was going to end, when we could solve our issues, and that goes for life as well, but also particularly in this context, trumpet playing. But when you do find that relief, it's a much more prominent feeling, and a much more prominent feeling in that positivity than the negativity that you felt in the moments leading up to trying to improve and not and finding a regression in your trumpet playing and the frustrations that come with that.
Oh man, so good, man. Thank you so much for sharing that and going that deep into it, because quite honestly, you answered a lot of the questions I was going to ask you through the story you told. So So that's just great,
Yeah.
man. And I'm so happy for you that it's all coming together, and so many key things in that story. So many key things that we may need to talk about on another episode. But real, just a couple of things I want to just quickly highlight is, first of all, one of the things that you said was that I believe you said it was when you took that month and a half off. You said, I'm just going to put it away, not going to put any sort of a time frame on it. That's probably, if there's anything that's elongated my recovery at the beginning of it, it was because even though I did take I took 2.5 months off at first, and I thought that was enough, right? According to my doctor, who, to his credit, he was a very well accomplished orthopedic surgeon, right? Or orthopedic doctor. But there's not really a business for, helping trumpet players get through injury, right? It's a developing field, right? And so he was doing the best he could and told me that, everything should be fine. And so I thought everything would be fine, but here I am a year and a half later, still figuring things out. And so that when you said that, I loved that you brought that up, because that's probably one of the most important things in a person's recovery, is just right off the bat, not, putting any sort of a time frame or a deadline for when they have to be recovered by. Excuse me. And and then the other thing that I wanted to just point out, and to your credit, was the fact that you kept going, right? And you kept pushing through just that trial and error period. It's that can be a very demoralizing time. And so I guess my question is, if you like, we're going to kind of go deep here for a second, but in addition to that conversation you had with your girlfriend at the time, why did you decide to stay in it? Like, why did you decide to stay in the game? Because even then, you didn't know what was going to happen, right? And one of the things that I like to do on this show is kind of just give mindset tips. I think that's one of the most important things we can develop as recovering musicians, or just musicians in general, is just a healthy mindset about our growth. And so one of the things in one of my previous episodes I talked about is finding the reason why you're doing it in the first place, why you're a musician in the first place. And then to extend that, why you're deciding to push through recovery instead of trying to find another path. Because some people do that and it works out great for them. But for some others, they, like you and me, right, and countless others, we decide to push through and get to the other side. So if you want to just kind of dive deep into that, why did you decide to stick with it?
Part of it was career path. Part of it was who I had built myself up to be, leading up until that point in the injury, and leading up until 2021, where I had to ask myself if I wanted to continue to keep going. It helped me tremendously that I had already, again, started becoming known for what I was doing. I found it very hard, the idea of leaving behind everything I worked that hard to accomplish. And I wanted so desperately, not for all those years performing and making connections and meeting people and doing all these big performances and whatnot. I wanted so hard to not let that all just fall away and be for nothing. Not that it could have had absolutely no impact on me afterwards or whatever. Because all these little, even the small performances, the big performances, they all have an impact on who I am today and how I view music and how much I love and adore performing. But it was that trajectory I continued to be on, but that was on at the time. Again, it was hard to see me stop. After all that work that I had done. And so I told myself, if there is going to be a way to figure this out, it's going to be worth it. After seeing as I'm just continuing to move up in terms of my career and whatnot. And even through the injury, I'd still been continuing to get performances and working and stuff like that. Well, people
And
aren't
that
seeing it
blows
from the
my mind,
outside.
by the way.
Yeah.
That just blows my
Well,
mind
well,
that you're
people
still
weren't
able to
seeing.
continue doing that, you know?
Sure. People weren't, I had to remember that people didn't see this injury as negatively as I did from the outside. I know of all the frustrations and how terrible it truly was because I'm the one going through it. But in other people's ears, I suppose the trumpet playing wasn't. I knew the level it could be at, and I knew the potential of my trumpet playing. Despite the injury, other people aren't thinking that. They just think that my sound is my sound. They're not thinking, oh, when they see me on a stage, he's going through an injury right now. That's not what they're thinking. They have no idea, most of the audience, for the most part, that I'm even going through something to begin with. So you almost have to create a facade in that way, and do your best to perform at your highest, to the point where, perform so well as you can for myself at that point. This is what worked for me. I don't necessarily know if I'd recommend this to everybody, but I had to kind of fake it until I made it, kind of thing. And again, put on a facade that and perform so well, frankly, to the best of my ability, to almost fool people into thinking that nothing was wrong. Sometimes a high note would come up in a solo, and I had to ask myself, is this going to be the time to go for this right now? And if I knew that I was going to go for it and miss it because I was not comfortable, then, perhaps, let's put it this way, perhaps I'd go for the note, miss it, but hit something a little bit under, or whatever the case. And now we're getting really technical, I know. But again, that was kind of me thinking, other people in the audience, they don't know I missed the note. They think I just landed on what I landed on. You know what I mean? So again, I'm almost, at that point, it's almost kind of like, you know yourself, the truth of what's going on in that moment, but you're kind of fooling the audience and into thinking of what's really happening. And that's just I think it was a healthy thing for me to do, to just continue on, because people are going to enjoy it and compliment you regardless, as long as you're not up there, for myself, as long as I wasn't up there like completely missing and just air was coming out of the trumpet or something like that to an embarrassing fashion. You know what I mean? If I could continue to play and notes would come out, then I'm going to find a way to kind of work around the injury, to kind of work around the regressions and the aspects of my playing that were very much suffering. So again, the motivation too, the support from other people is huge, not only from your teachers, but perhaps it's even more valuable from folks that aren't your teachers, because your teachers are, of course, supposed to, motivate you and keep you in this field. And also you're their students, so you're also their work. So of course they kind of motivate you to keep on going. And it's not criticizing anyone or anything or to their fault. It's just like their job. But I think it's maybe even more important to hear from other people, perhaps, loved ones or friends, or people who aren't even connected in music, who can kind of give you a perspective that isn't musically based, for you to see a side that perhaps you hadn't really thought about prior. And I had felt really appreciated and loved by folks at that time that had carried me through. And again, my girlfriend at the time provided me with so much motivation and comfort to be able to have somebody else who saw in me what I also saw in me, and could help, and hold my hand through the process. That's such an important thing. Support goes such a long way in all aspects of life, and through these kinds of moments and these kinds of injuries too. The support will really, sometimes it's the biggest factor. And yeah, it was incredibly motivating, no doubt.
Yeah, that the importance of community just can't be overstated in coming back from an injury, because it's a hard enough thing to do, just period, to come back from an injury, no matter what it is, no matter what instrument, but you got to have that support system, or it's just that much more difficult. So Miles, as we're wrapping up, kind of, I'm curious how in the last, you said year and a half since you've kind of had that breakthrough and been coming back, how has that experience of that injury recovery period affected just you as a person, as a human being, and just in the other aspects of your life, from a mindset, lifestyle, what have you?
As I had mentioned, I'd already been a patient person. I had already attempted to be a patient person in my lifestyle and in everything I do. But I think that patience has just been amplified in myself and in my own mindset towards everyday goals and everyday things. It's one of those things that's like, well, if I can go 2.5 years without being comfortable with the thing I love the most, which is music and trumpet, then I think I can conquer, most things that come my way in life and whatnot. So it's allowed me to be a more confident person. And the confidence with the instrument is connected to my confidence as a person. I think it was the end of 2022, started to feel a lot more comfortable in my playing, obviously. And I started feeling a connection with the instrument that I hadn't felt before, because I'd worked so much with the fundamentals and trying to be as good of a trumpet player as possible. I'm continuing to do that and try and do that now, I should say. I'd been doing so much performing. I'd started to mold myself with the instrument and the identity of the two. And again, that just came with so much performing and whatnot, and all these gigs and school performances that I had all across Columbus and beyond, and all the compositions that I had then started to make. And there came a point where I just, I felt there was almost an inseparableness between the instrument and myself. And I started to have more like dreams about performing on the trumpet, which I had mentioned still don't necessarily have a whole lot, but I started to have more of those kinds of things. And sometimes I have dreams where I kid you not, I'm like playing and I could hear the notes that are going in the dream, and they match up to the fingerings that are going on in the dream too. Wow. Like it's a level of connectivity that is, again, it's really prominent. And so I feel like I've just been, I've been able to love music more, but trumpet playing as a whole has begun to feel much more like a part of my life. It's almost like the trumpet, I have one arm, two arms. It's like this is my third, upper limb sometimes, as I'm playing. And I think about it so constantly. And so I think my love for the instrument has just grown. I had already enjoyed it. But now when I hear it and when I think about it and I think about pressing those three buttons, and now that I'm playing this trumpet that I love so much and a mouthpiece that I love so much too, it's also an aspect visually for me, and physically with the instrument that also ties into it. And my appreciation for it, that it just, again, it fits, it starts to become the identity that you share. It starts to become the personality that you have, at least for myself. And so that's what I've begun to discover. But I think that patience part really is like the most important of it all, just making me a more patient person. And the idea of perseverance is also one that has become more important and more realistic through persevering through this trumpet injury. When I was playing and trying to get better and trying to make this progression over the past 4 years or so, I wasn't as calm with my nature of trying to, in the methodical nature of, playing through my warm-ups and exercises and whatnot as perhaps I should have been. I always made a point to warm up as calmly as possible and quietly and steadily as possible. But, after about 30 minutes or an hour into a session, I gotten to a point where I was attempting to be forceful with the notes that were coming out. The big thing for me in jazz trumpet playing is like high notes and stuff like that, and range and power and stuff like that. That is exemplified through jazz trumpet playing quite often. And I found myself in a place where I was constantly just trying to, again, just force my way through the notes, which sounds negative, and it sounds like I'm setting it up to say that that was a bad thing that actually didn't serve me well. But I think it's something that actually did serve me well. As a quick side note, when I was at the ITG conference back in early June, I had gone to the Lotus Trumpets booth where they had their instruments that folks could play. And Adam Raffel was there, overseeing what was going on and also giving his feedback and taking part in some of the trials that some of the people who are visiting at the conference could take part in. And, when he saw me try and go up there and play through his instruments, I was having a little bit of trouble trying to get a good sound, especially in range and stuff like that. And he looked at me, he said, "Man, you're a brute. You know that you're a brute when you try to play and you go for a lot of force." And of course, trying to explain to me through that time, through his instrument, now trying to relax myself and whatnot. But that bruteness, that's kind of what I've become, known for in my playing to those who know me and those who I know. Because that was part of the process of getting back into playing comfortably anyway. Not being scared and not shying away from the moment, not shying away from the kind of player I wanted to be. I don't necessarily that's another one of those things too. It's kind of like certainly not a do as I say kind of person in my experiences and in my methods of practice and whatnot. But that forcefulness and that unafraidness to try and go and find that sound I wanted is the motivation I needed to persevere through the injury and find exactly who I wanted to be. And now I feel so comfortable, not only as who I am as a person, but more importantly in this conversation, who I am as a trumpet player, because I wasn't afraid to go find that. And patience allowed me to be able to find that, and just time allowed me to be able to find that trumpet player who I knew was in there deep inside, who I was just this whole time just trying to be and become and play as. And finally I found myself in a place now where I can be that and I can feel comfortable. And that just, again, I came through that forceful nature. So I urge people not to shy away from what exactly they're trying to go for. If you envision it in your head, find out exactly what you got to do that and be that. Maybe be a little bit more smart. I hope that this forcefulness that I've brought upon myself in this practicing is not going to affect me greatly down the line in the future. And I still try to be methodical with my warm-ups and whatnot and get into a comfortable place. You know, we've all heard the Freddie Hubbard stories and whatnot, right? Of how things can get when you just, stop caring as much about that side of the trumpet playing and whatnot. But also, as my dad always says, just go for it, go for it. And in the case of this performer I've tried to be, I've just gone for it. And if you miss a note, you miss a note. But everybody misses notes, and the greats will miss notes too. Far less often, perhaps, than a lot of younger folks or intermediate or young professionals might miss notes, but they do. It happens. But it's about the consistency for me that matters, and the comfort as well that I've been able to find and discover through this process and this journey of trying to become the trumpet player that I've tried to mold myself into today.
Awesome. Well, a couple last questions. So the first one is, you can go back to Miles Franklin Smith in your mom's office in 2019 that day, and you have the opportunity to kind of tap yourself on the shoulder and say, hey, tighten that screw, or not, or leave it there, leave it be, leave that situation be. Would you do that? Has this all been worth it to you to leave it be, or would you go back and tighten that screw again?
It's hard to say. I've thought this myself many times in the past 4.5 years. I'm more inclined to say that I would not change what happened. As painful as it was and as frustrating as this became, almost angrily so, honestly, in that 2.5 years. When I see where I'm at now, and where I see where my playing is now, and how comfortable I am now, and how far I've gotten because of it in my career now, I'm also even more further inclined to say I wouldn't change anything because it was worth it. But at the same time, I also find myself curious if I would have found more progress in a shorter amount of time, because it's important to keep in mind that 2.5 years, really 2 years of productive practicing was kind of taken off of my life, basically, and my career, I'll say, because that whole time I was trying to recover from an injury and find out how to replay the instrument that I know and love as a trumpet. So I like to wonder where I'd be if I could get 2 years of practice time back. I'm comfortable with who I am and my sound now, so I don't really mind that. Looking, with hindsight and whatnot, I don't necessarily mind that 2 years gone. But I like to wonder where I'd be if I had 2 years, if I'd be that much perhaps better of a trumpet player. But then there is the issues of the red stuff and playing with bad technique that perhaps, as Charlie Porter had told me over Zoom, would have found their way to me anyway, this issue. Right. So it was kind of inevitable, and it seems. So perhaps I wouldn't change a thing. Perhaps I'd go and maybe change the violence of the circumstance and whatnot, and maybe it couldn't have gone down that way. Maybe I tap on my shoulder and say, "Hey, bud, tighten the pin on the tuning slide, and also change how you play. You're gonna want to do it for your future of your career and stuff like that."
And then you could do both.
So
Knock out two birds with one stone.
exactly,
You know.
that's right. So would I change a thing? I'll say no for now. I'll say no, but it's a tough question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something, for me, it's just like I would not trade the knowledge that I've gained and the strength of mindset that I've gained, in the last year and a half. But would I change some things about my lifestyle back then? Of course I would, but it was those, aspects of my mindset and my lifestyle that, put me down that path anyways. So it's kind of like who knows, but
Yeah.
okay. So Miles, last question. You are at Northern Illinois. You don't know anybody yet, but
Right.
somehow a fellow college student who's not a trumpet player comes up and says, "Hey, I heard you on the Trust the Process podcast, and I'm a piano player, flute player, choose your instrument, and I'm going through my own injury. What advice do you have for me?" So not instrument specific. What's the one thing you would tell a musician going through injury?
The one thing I would say is just relay that message that patience is key. But of course, that's more of a phrase than actual advice. If I had to give true advice, I would just say, be as curious as possible. Be as curious as possible. What I love that came through this process was, again, all the mouthpieces I bought. Maybe it was a lot of money, perhaps, and I could have saved a bit more and have a bit more now because of it. But I've also, now I feel like I found a mouthpiece or two that I'm going to stick with forever because they feel that good. That's probably not going to be the case because famous last words from every trumpet player probably ever.
Right.
It was like, "Oh, this is the last trumpet I'm ever going to buy. This is the last mouthpiece." But
that's so true.
Now I haven't, but I haven't bought a mouthpiece in, I think like over or about a year or so, or no, I think I bought one at ITG or something like that. But let's put it this way: the consistency and the pace at which I've been buying mouthpieces has certainly slowed down. Be as curious as possible with that. I've loved and enjoyed the process of the different materials, the different materials, the different metals on my face, or even not metal, like the turbo wood mouthpieces from the Lotus,
those are
or
crazy.
acrylic mouthpieces. Yeah. Those are pretty wild. Or the acrylic mouthpieces from Austin Custom Brass as well. Mm-hmm. The different trumpets I've been playing and trying on, I've also really just loved that too. The curiosity of where my mouthpiece goes on my lips and how far that. What I've enjoyed as much as it was frustrating is the fun, almost putting together puzzle pieces in a way and trying to make things fit and make things work in my own way. But be comfortable, whoever this person might be. I'd say be comfortable in doing it. Do it how you think you should do it. Do it in the way that you think is necessary for you to do that. It being recover how you think you need to. Because again, everybody's different, especially with more physical based instruments. Everyone is different. If you're a piano player, every pianist perhaps is going to have different sized fingers and hands and stuff like that. And depending on the injury and the grade of the injury, the recovery is going to be different, and the process of this curiosity is also might be different. But be curious and have fun with that curiosity amongst that frustration. That's what I would tell that person.
Oh, so good. I love that word. Curious has become like one of my favorite words of this year because it occurred to me a few months ago, like if you become curious about things, you take away the need for things to control things. You know what I mean? You control your situation, control your timeline, everything. I even talk about that in one of the episodes. That's at the time we're recording this. It should be coming out next week. It's just that's like the secret tool, that secret weapon that every musician can have at their disposal is that curiosity, from an education standpoint, but also just to take the pressure off of growth, of the process of recovery, of everything. So that's just like, that's the $1 million word. If there's nothing else that you get from Miles' story, I hope it would be that, because I can just attest to that so much, of course, and everything else you said today, man. So I'm just so grateful for you for being willing to share your story. And it's just, the more people I think you kind of open up about their stories, it's going to create, more of a community or surrounding it, more of a conversation of preventative measures and education of like what resources are out there. And so I just appreciate you kind of adding your voice to that pool and your insight about patience. One of my favorite quotes is actually from a guy in the personal development sphere. He always says to make sure that you, I'm going to misquote it. It's like 3 words, but he says, outlast the temporary, and that resiliency, I think it's like curiosity and resiliency, I think are the 2 skills that are just so needed, no matter what you're going through. And I think you really very well illustrated that through your story today. So I want to just acknowledge you and thank you for that. So
yeah, certainly, and thank you for having me on. It's always good to. It feels nothing but satisfactory to be able to speak about it and stuff. I think it's as a human being, as human beings, it's important to just talk about things and whatnot. And when one's going through something, especially as significant as a career threatening injury, it's so nice to be able to speak about it. And so I appreciate you giving this platform. I think this is such an important thing. And it's too bad you didn't come out with it 3 years ago or something like that for my own sake to be able to hear about it. But the fact that it's happening now, and the fact that it's happening at all is what's important, really. And so thank you for creating this platform and bringing so much light to a topic that is much more common than I think a lot of people realize.
Definitely. Well, Miles, where can so you're in Northern Illinois. If people want to kind of follow your career, where can they find you online?
Certainly, if they were wishing to find me online, you can just go to. I have an Instagram account. That's really the only social media I have right now. If you search up Miles Franklin Smith, you'll probably find my page. My handle right now is mfs.centraloh, that being Central Ohio. I no longer live in Central Ohio, so that's probably going to change. But just search up Miles Franklin Smith or MFS Miles Franklin Smith. It'll probably pop up to whatever I decide to change it to here soon. And for anyone who would ever be willing to, wanting to reach me, the email is the same as the handle is now. It won't change. It's mfs.centraloh@gmail.com. Other than that, anyone who might be hearing this, who might be living in the Chicago area or Illinois, I might hope that you might come see a show or something like that. And that's the kind of thing that I typically will post on my Instagram page. So that's where one could find me.
Cool. Well, awesome. Well, thanks for adding your name to that resource pile, I guess, or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
sure.
To all of you guys listening out there in podcast land, thanks for joining us today. I hope what you heard from Miles today has touched your heart and is giving you a new perspective on things. And if you have someone in your life that is going through injury or just needs a new perspective or anything like that, be sure to share it with them. Do all those podcasty things like subscribing, leaving reviews. Those are just going to help more people find it. And we really appreciate it over here at the podcast. So until next time, keep trusting the process. Thanks for listening today. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. To see a full bio for our guest today, see the show notes, or go to our website at trusttheprocesspodcast.com. Make sure you share this with a musician you care about who is going through injury, a music educator in your life, or anyone just trying to make it in life. If you have a suggestion for a guest or topic to cover, shoot me an email at trustprocesspodcast@gmail.com or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. Before we go, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you and shout out to my team: Daniel Baldwin, who is my audio engineer, Kevin West, who does all music and sound effects for the show, Peyton Womack, our website developer, and my sister, Dana Lovell, who created the logo and promotional materials. We wouldn't have the show without them. So tune in next time for another episode of Trust the Process.